It's a lazy August day in Colorado Springs, and the warm sun is slowly setting beyond Pikes Peak.
A very pleasant time of the year, people spending a lot of time outside, enjoying themselves.
At 9 p.m., an 18-wheeler pulls to a stop in the parking lot of the South Hancock Apartments. In the cab sit day laborers Carl Taylor and Jim Sibbett, who are on the last leg of a long-distance moving job.
They had come from Oklahoma, that's where they were both from, and had loaded up some merchandise from here in Colorado Springs and were eventually headed back to Oklahoma.
In the passenger seat sits Everett Bass, a local man who's been lending a hand.
That's me, I'm right over there. Do you guys want to come stay at my place?
No, we're just gonna stay inside the truck because we gotta leave early in the morning.
A lot of truckers will sleep in the cab of their truck, and that's what Mr. Sibbett was doing that evening.
Hey, y'all have a nice trip.
As Everett Bass heads home, Carl Taylor and Jim Sibbett settle in for the night.
Carl Taylor climbed in the back of the truck, and apparently there were some moving quilts that were laying around that he was sleeping on.
Within minutes, both men are asleep. But around 1 a.m., Jim Sibbett is jolted awake.
Mr. Sibbett said that during the night he heard a commotion, he heard a noise.
Jim steps out of the cab and makes his way to the back of the truck.
Carl, Betty, hold tight. And that's when he found Mr. Taylor beat up and bleeding in the back of the trailer. This gentleman's head's pretty much beat to a pulp.
You come around the corner and you see something like that, it has to almost be surreal, like, am I really seeing what I think I see? Is my friend still alive?
Across town, Detective Joe Kenda is buried in a pile of paperwork.
I was working a night shift that we called the cocktail shift from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., the hours when the bars get busy.
Go for Kenda.
1:20 in the morning, I get a radio call that there's been a possible homicide on an apartment complex in the southeast part of the city.
Kenda is hardly surprised by the location of the call.
This particular apartment complex had a reputation for street crime, for some level of violent crime. Robberies were not uncommon in that area.
10-4, I'll be right there.
And with that, Kenda is heading to the crime scene.
So when I arrived at this scene, it's not unlike most. It's chaotic. It's warm, so a lot of the residents are outside.
How you doing?
Good, and you?
Good. What do we got?
The officers tell me that the victim is Carl Vincent Taylor. He has severe head injuries and beaten about the body as well, from what they could see. They see deep lacerations in his scalp, administered by blows to the head. They removed him in an ambulance and took him to a hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival.
Kenda hopes an autopsy will uncover more details about the murder weapon. In the meantime, he turns his attention to the evidence at hand.
So what have you found?
Well, it seems like as they were fleeing, they dropped this cardboard box and a wad of cash.
Did you find a murder weapon?
No, sir, not yet.
Kenda takes a closer look at the pile of bills.
It's all bloodstained. It counts up to $43. Someone has taken a life violently. For what? $43? Well, no, they seem to have forgotten that.
Inside the trailer is a gruesome scene.
There's blood on the roof of the trailer, on the walls of the trailer. There's cast-off blood from an instrument being thrown around the truck because of repeated blows on our victim.
The cast-off blood confirms the ferocity of the attack. The victim was struck repeatedly with some sort of blunt instrument, and the disarray inside the trailer suggests a heated struggle took place.
So the question becomes, who could be responsible for this? Well, who's here?
Kenda turns his attention to the crowd of onlookers.
Well, Mr. Sibbett is here, so we start talking to him.
How you doing? I'm Detective Kenda.
Hey, detective.
So you're the victim's partner?
Yeah.
How long you guys work together?
Long time.
Sibbett says that he and Carl have worked together for years, that Carl is his helper. Carl's a very good worker. He has no bad personal habits. He doesn't use drugs. He doesn't cause any problems. He doesn't create issues for anybody.
Carl Taylor was a 47-year-old man from Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma.
Our family was four, mother and dad, and Carl and I. We were pretty close-knit. We were so far away from any neighbors that we kind of looked at one another as the whole rest of the world.
After graduating high school, Carl enlisted in the Air Force and fought in the Korean War.
He felt that other people are fighting this war, and it's my individual responsibility to fight also.
But shortly after his deployment, Carl's bravery was put to the test.
They had crashed. The plane was burning. Nobody else could get out, and he re-entered the burning plane several times to get the living and the dead out of that airplane.
For his heroism, Carl received a Silver Star. After the war, he remained in the Air Force for more than a decade and eventually married the love of his life.
Her name was Joyce. She had 2 children before they married, and then they had 2 girls, and they looked at him as dad.
Oh, my Lord.
After leaving the Air Force, Carl made a living as a long-haul delivery man, which is how he came to be working with Jim Sibbett.
What were you doing in this area?
We were moving in some household goods, and then we were going to empty the truck and head on out of town.
The truck was nearly empty, with the exception of a few personal items that they were supposed to deliver to another individual the following day.
Did you happen to come across anyone while you were here that might have gotten a confrontation with him? You know, someone who didn't like him, might want to see him hurt?
No, he was with me all day long. We did hire a local boy, Everett Bass. He's right down there.
And that's him right there?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the help.
Okay.
Officer? Sir? Could you have him step up here for me? Yes, sir.
He'll come right over this.
How you doing? I'm Detective Kenda.
Everett.
You were working with these guys yesterday?
Yeah.
He reports that he was around these guys, helping them load, unload the truck during the day.
Did you happen to see Carl get in any kind of argument or confrontation with anybody?
Yeah.
Who was that?
To Kenda's surprise, Everett nods his head and points across the crime scene to Jim Sibbett.
Hey, Carl, be more careful. Calm down. Hey, man, I'm gonna knock out of it if you don't start listening to what I say.
He noticed that Sibbett and Taylor argued the entire day, back and forth, sometimes quite loudly.
He had dropped some of the boxes. This angered Jim, and Jim, had some words with Carl.
Well, that's interesting. You're in a dispute with this man, and right now that same person has been beaten to death in the back of your truck. Sibbett said to Carl, "I'm going to punch your lights out." Somebody did. Not with a fist, but with an object. I don't know what happened here, but I'm really going to find out. We're investigating the murder of Carl Taylor, who was found beaten to death in the back of a truck. He'd recently been arguing with his employer, Jim Sibbett. That certainly raises a specter about Mr. Sibbett. You're in a dispute with this man, apparently over an extended period of time during the day, and right now that same person has been beaten to death in the back of your truck.
Could Jim Sibbett's simmering frustration with Carl have boiled over into a murderous rage? During his initial conversation with Jim, Kenda didn't notice anything suspicious. But this time around, he's on high alert for telltale signs of deception.
Why don't you tell me about this confrontation you had with the victim today?
Sibbett realizes when I'm talking to him the second time that my questions are different and he's no longer just a witness, that he's being considered to be involved in this.
Well, it wasn't really a confrontation. That's just the way me and Carl work.
You guys were arguing all day and you actually threatened her?
Yeah, I did, but it wasn't really anything.
I said that kind of thing to him all the time, but I didn't really mean it. We would argue back and forth. It was all verbal. It was the way it was with he and I. But I didn't kill him. I absolutely had nothing to do with this.
But before Kenda takes Jim Sibbett at his word, he wants concrete proof Sibbett had nothing to do with the crime.
This is a bludgeon death. It is messy. It is incredibly bloody.
Let me see your hands.
Mr. Sibbett is clean as a pin. He has no blood on his clothing, person, or shoes. He has no injuries on his hands. There would be all of that if he was wielding an instrument, causing the kind of damage that the victim received.
Satisfied that he's telling the truth, Kenda asks Sibbett about the contents of the truck.
So is there anything missing?
A box of Christmas tree ornaments.
Is there anything of value in the box?
No, not really.
How much money did you pay Carl?
$43.
Sibbett said he paid him $43 hours before he's discovered beaten to death.
And $43 is the exact amount of cash discovered at the scene.
The indications from everything in this crime scene are clear to me. These are people, one person or more than one, who are thieves. They want to slip in, take something of value, and slip back out again. I think they are shocked to discover Carl Taylor inside that truck. They attack him. The result is pure panic. The value of the products that were removed from this truck were minimal. The property they took from the victim, they disposed of by accident.
What we need you guys to do is split up, go knock on some doors, wake some people up, see what you can find out. All right?
Naturally, you want to locate as many witnesses as you can who may have heard or seen anything. You go knock on doors. Did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Do you know anything?
The clientele living in that apartment complex at the time were a large number of people that I knew that I'd either arrested or dealt with as witnesses in other matters. It's like, oh, hello, how are you? Out of jail, I see.
In addition to its criminal element, the South Hancock Apartments are home to a number of soldiers from nearby Fort Carson.
A great many United States Army personnel who are assigned to Fort Carson, Colorado, do not like to live on the post because the post has rules about behavior, about drinking, so they seek to live off post.
But despite a complex full of night owl soldiers and familiar ex-cons, Kenda and his men have a hard time drumming up a credible lead. That is, until Kenda meets apartment manager Lois Haney.
Did you happen to hear or see anything tonight?
I came down when I saw the lights.
She is very street smart. She knows what tenants have a tendency to misbehave and involve themselves in crimes like burglary of motor vehicles and that sort of minor petty theft.
Do you think anyone in your apartments might have something to do with this?
There's several. We've got Willie, there's a Richard, Sonny Evans.
She provides several names of people. It's not because she knows they did anything. She knows they've done things in the past, and that makes them suspicious. We agree with her, but we have no information that ties any one of those people to this event.
Did you happen to hear anything at all?
People talk all the time. I haven't heard anything yet, but I'm sure I will.
Information bounces around among people. Not one person usually doesn't know everything, but a combination of people do know everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With no concrete leads, Kenda returns to headquarters. But within mere minutes of his arrival, there's a break in the case.
Kenda.
Another officer contacts me and says he has a very good, reliable informant who gives him the name Joe White. The informant tells this other officer that Joe White is the guy who killed the man in the truck in the apartment complex parking lot. Joe White was in the United States Army, lived off post in his middle 20s, had a minor criminal history. He hung around with a lot of the people who lived in that apartment complex.
Okay, thank you.
Kenda's men quickly locate Joe White and bring him down to the station for questioning.
This is the very first time he's ever been brought into an investigation division with a sign over the door that says homicide. So he is already distressed before I ever speak to him.
I've got a reliable source that put you at a murder scene at the South Hancock apartment complex last night.
Murder? What are you talking about?
You weren't there.
Oh, absolutely not.
We interrogate him. He denies. He has done a lot of things in his life, which is absolutely true, but he didn't do this.
Where were you?
I was at my girlfriend's.
What's your girlfriend's address?
He becomes so confused and so frightened that he's stepping all over himself, trying to give us as much as he can. He said he was with his girlfriend at her place hours before, but he says he doesn't know where his girlfriend lives. So the question's obvious. Joe, pay attention here. If you don't know where your girlfriend lives, how could you be with her like you said you were?
You had nothing to do with this.
I had absolutely nothing to do
You know
with
nothing
this.
about it.
I'm sorry, man. I'm just really nervous right now.
Are you willing to take a polygraph exam?
Absolutely. Whatever it takes to clear my name, because I had nothing to do with whatever it is you're talking about.
And he says that he will take a polygraph, he will do anything he can do to convince us that he was not responsible.
Officers hook a frazzled Joe White up to the lie detector.
Polygraphs to me only matter if they produce an admission. It puts a lot of pressure on someone to hook them up to a machine.
Is your name Joe White?
Yes.
Are you in the U.S. Army?
Yes.
Were you on the night of August the 14th in the back of a truck in an apartment complex in the southeast part of the city? No.
Did you attack that person?
No.
Do you know who killed that man?
No.
When the test is complete, Kenda steps out to analyze the results.
The polygraphist says he passes it with flying colors. He had nothing to do with this crime. So we go from being excited to being grossly disappointed. The next step I think that's important is if I'm going to find who killed this person, in my mind, I need to know what killed the person.
Hey, Joe, come on
How you
in.
doing?
I routinely attend autopsies because you can learn things, not just the medical side of it, not just the cause of death, but it gives me a better sense of what was done to this person.
You have a cause of death yet?
Cause of death's lacerated liver.
However, the coroner mentions that even though the lacerated liver is technically the cause of death, the head injuries would have also been fatal.
This gentleman died of multiple blunt force injuries. He had injuries to the head with the scalp lacerations. He also had injuries to the abdomen. There was a lot of blood in his abdominal cavity, about 2.5 liters. 2.5 liters is about half the total amount of blood that an adult male has in their entire body.
But Kenda still needs more information about the murder weapon.
See the ridges on this?
Very symmetrical and even.
If you can identify a particular item as the weapon used to commit this crime, and as you develop your case, you find a suspect or an individual who happens to own such an item, then that becomes really interesting.
Is it possible I could take some one-to-one photographs?
Yeah, the camera's right behind you.
We look at his scalp and we see these deep, deep cuts all the way to the bone.
So these are massive lacerations, and you're only going to see those with a weapon that has a lot of mass to it, something that can be swung and construct the skin with a lot of force, resulting in large tears of the skin.
The wounds aren't only deep, they're unlike anything Kenda has ever seen before.
There's a pattern in the wound. The pattern is ridges. Both myself and the coroner are looking at this and are mystified. What is this? I don't know. Do you? Nope. Never seen anything like it. We are investigating the death of Carl Taylor, a 47-year-old man who was beaten to death in the rear of a tractor trailer. Something that always struck me in every homicide is the sadness of it all and the uselessness of it all. Someone has taken a life violently. For what? $43? A box of Christmas ornaments? We're gonna kill for that?
With no prime suspect, Kenda is sitting in on Carl Taylor's autopsy, looking for information about the weapon that killed him.
If the implement is unique, you can get what we call pattern lacerations, and pattern lacerations will give you almost an exact appearance of what that implement's going to look like, and that's what we had in this case.
The ridges have exact measurements between each one, and they are measured in millimeters. What that instantly tells me is this object, whatever it is man-made. It is engineered. The question becomes, what is it?
Neither Kenda nor the coroner have a clue, but Kenda knows where he might be able to find one. Taking the photos to a local tool manufacturer, Kenda hopes one of the engineers there can identify the object that made the ridge marks.
Afternoon, Detective.
How you doing? Joe Kenda.
Doing great. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Got a conference room right here.
Thank you.
So I went to this company and introduced myself, got everybody's attention. Everybody was all excited. Oh boy, this is different.
I need to warn you ahead of time that these photos are very gruesome, graphic. I want to make sure that you're all right with it.
So these are pictures taken in an autopsy of a human being that has been beaten to death with this object. They are disgusting. And I want you to be aware of that up front.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Okay.
He opens the binder, looks at the first photograph, starts to perspire. Throws up in a trash can. I look at him and I say, well, then I guess there is a problem, eh? Everyone thinks that they're going to know what that looks like, and they don't have a clue what it looks like until they see it. It's not the movies, it's not television, it's real.
Hoping the other two engineers have stronger stomachs, Kenda shows them the binder.
You guys sure you're gonna be okay?
Sure.
You know what that looks like, Jamie, don't you?
Sure.
Yeah. That's a surveyor's transit.
What? It's the leg from a surveyor's transit post.
What exactly is that?
It's the pole they use to do the surveying.
And I'm thinking, who's going to have one of those in their pocket in a bad neighborhood at 1 o'clock in the morning? I don't think I'm looking for Mason and Dixon. That's not it.
Given the circumstances of the crime scene, it's kind of unlikely.
Kenda insists there's got to be other possibilities and asks the engineers to do some further research.
Is it possible to leave these photos with you, go over them a little more, see if you
Oh,
can find anything else that it might be?
Sure, Detective.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll leave these photos with you. And call me when you have a list that includes something besides a surveyor's transit post leg.
The next day, Kenda gets that call from the engineers.
It's like too specific.
I know.
Or something.
Yeah.
Gentlemen.
Detective.
They say the number one thing remains the surveyor's transit leg post thing, which I just can't see as being possible.
Did you come up with anything else?
A surveyor's tripod?
The second item is another surveyor's instrument, just as odd and just as unusual as item one.
How about anything other than surveyor's instruments?
We think that a General Motors bumper jack from 1972 would have done the same thing.
Bingo.
Yep.
Item 3 lights up to me. A bumper jack from a 1972 General Motors product. people are going to have one of those at 1 o'clock in the morning.
And in 1972, all General Motors vehicles used the exact same bumper jack.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate the help.
Now I'm not just looking for someone, I'm looking for someone that owns or has access to a 1972 General Motors product. That is huge, in my opinion. I'm feeling pretty confident now that I'm getting somewhere in this case.
Another break comes shortly after Kenda returns to the station.
Go for Kenda.
I've got a guy here who wants to talk to you about a murder charge.
What's he need to talk to me about?
Yeah, the Taylor murder, he's wanting to make some kind of deal.
Why do you have him? I've arrested him for burglary.
The burglary suspect wants to use information about Carl Taylor's murder as a bargaining chip.
Informants in general are a delicate matter for the police to deal with. Informants are criminals. That's why they're informants. Everybody they know is a criminal. So you have to take a lot of what they tell you with a grain of salt. But they are a necessary evil in the police investigation world.
So what about my deal?
He wants a deal so bad he can taste it. He has an extensive criminal history, and he knows he's going to go to prison.
You give me some good information, I'll think about it.
No deal, no information.
All right, enjoy your time in prison.
My immediate response is, you don't get deals here. Tell me what you know, I'll think about it. Well, I'm not going to do that. Fine, get by. Go to prison. Have a nice life.
Hold on, wait.
You got something for me?
I think I may know who robbed the truck.
We believe we have in our hands an informant that knows the details of this crime. A person in his position, this burglar, he's desperate. So I'm going to beat him up psychologically and find out what he knows. We've had a lot of dead ends in this case, but I really do feel that we're finally getting closer to knowing who killed Oklahoma native Carl Taylor.
Kenda feels confident that his informant knows who robbed the truck and killed Carl Taylor.
Who was it?
Sonny, Eric Kenda, and Gookie.
He says that Sonny, who he knows is Sonny Evans, Gookie, who he knows is Phil Brown, Eric Kendall, and some other dude who he doesn't know the name of are responsible for the death of Carl Taylor.
Finally, Kenda has 3 names of potential suspects and an unconfirmed 4th.
These are all people who live in the complex. They're all people with criminal records. They all have a history of burglary of motor vehicles in their past.
Well, they were all 4 together, and they were just coming up with a plan to rob the truck.
He indicated that they had gotten together that night at the apartment complex when he saw the van parked there and had formulated the plan then to break into this van.
Can you tell me which one it was that killed the guy in the truck?
Sonny.
He's talking about Sonny Evans being the one that struck the fatal blows to Carl Taylor.
You know Sonny. Oh, yeah, I know Sonny. He's also a young black male in his early 20s.
What kind of car does Sonny drive?
A Cadillac.
You know the year?
Like a 71, 72.
That was a lightning bolt. This guy does know what he's talking about. We're doing extremely well.
Thank you for the information.
Hey, hold on. Am I still getting a deal? What about my deal?
No.
Damn!
Can I get my deal now? No.
With a quartet of potential suspects in his sights, Kenda sets off in search of the murder weapon.
We need physical evidence now that's going to tell us whether or not these are the right players in this case. Sonny Evans does in fact own a 1972 Cadillac. I take that information, I write a search warrant.
You Sonny Evans?
Yeah, I'm Sonny.
I'm Lt.Joe Kenda. I'm investigating the murder of Carl Taylor. Do you know him?
I don't know no Carl.
Well, I could really use your help in this investigation.
Yeah, I got you. What you need?
I need to look in the trunk of your car.
You're not looking at the car.
So you're not going to help me that much, huh, Sonny? Well, it's okay. I've got a warrant. I'm taking your car right now.
Hey, man. Hey, you ain't gonna take my car. Hey.
Sir, you need to get back.
Ah, man, you about to take my car.
Get back, sir.
No.
Kenda has Sonny's 72 Cadillac taken to the police impoundment lot, where he orders a thorough search of the vehicle.
I search the passenger compartment under the seats. I'm looking for anything that might be of value. Open the trunk. There is the jack. When I looked at it laying there in the trunk, the first thought that came to me, look at those ridges. Well, I've seen those before. I saw them in Carl's head. This is the one.
Unfortunately, the jack appears to have been cleaned.
The exterior shows no evidence of blood. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, how thorough were you when you cleaned this, or you thought you did?
Kenda takes the jack to the crime lab for a more detailed inspection.
Did you find anything yet?
No, the car is clean. I'm looking at the jack now.
Can we determine who had their hands around this? By finding their fingerprints or palm prints on the weapon. Is there blood? Is there human hair?
Is there anything on the jack?
Looks like it's been wiped down.
Mind if I take a look?
Go ahead.
As I pass up and down this jack, at the very bottom edge, I see what looks like a human hair. It's only 3/8 of an inch long, and it's attached to one of the ridge grooves in the jack assembly.
The coroner carefully removes the hair and marks it as evidence. But it's still not enough to positively ID it as the murder weapon.
The exterior shows no evidence of blood. Let's see if you were smart enough to clean the inside of it. So we raise the end of this instrument, look down the hollow center, and we see blood.
Yep.
Dried blood. Lots of it.
There it is.
With the blood evidence in hand, Sonny Evans and Phil Brown are arrested immediately and taken down to the station for questioning. But Kenda's team discovers that their third suspect, Eric Kendall, has fled to Philadelphia.
We request the Philadelphia Police Department Homicide Unit find Eric Kendall.
Police, get out! Get out! Get out!
After being apprehended on the streets of North Philly, Eric Kendall is then extradited back to Colorado Springs, where he faces further questioning.
Eric Kendall decided, I don't know what everybody's saying in Colorado Springs, so I better tell my side of the story and tell the truth.
All right, Eric. Tell me your story.
So I was sleeping, right? And I hear this knock on my door. I'm like, what's up?
Who was it?
It was my friend Phil. That's who it was, man. It's my dude. Man, him and two other guys was wanting to rob this 18-wheeler that was sitting right outside the car.
Who were these other guys?
This dude named Sonny, this other dude named Big Rick.
What's Big Rick's name?
Ricky Dillon.
He gives me a name for this fourth individual, Ricky Dillon. He too lives in the complex.
Ricky Dillon was sort of a menacing character, a lot because of his appearance. I mean, he was a big guy. He was somebody who had a lot of, swagger, I guess you would say.
I don't know what everybody else told you. I'm gonna tell you what I saw that night.
Eric Kendall decides to confess in complete order and in detail as to what happened. It feels very good when you reach that point. You're not wondering anymore. You're talking to one of the players. Not someone who knows them, but someone who is them.
Detective Joe Kenda is investigating the murder of Carl Taylor, bludgeoned to death in the back of a semi-truck. Now one of the suspects is about to tell Kenda how the murder went down.
I don't know what everybody else told you. I'm gonna tell you what I saw that night.
Eric Kendall decides to confess in complete order and in detail as to what happened.
So So I was sleeping. Phil came knocking on the door.
What's up, bro? Hey, man, look here. What's up? We thinking about hitting this truck out back.
Phil told him that there was a truck parked outside, and he and a couple other guys were thinking of breaking into it.
Phil and Eric met up with the other two suspects to plot the burglary.
Chilling like a villain. Hey, what's up, man?
What's up? What's up? We think it's maybe something nice in there, maybe some rims or something.
How nice you think, man?
Well, it's a big truck. Maybe there's stereo equipment. Maybe there's something of value in here.
We got to figure out a way to get in it, because we know it's locked.
They assume that naturally the truck's going to be locked. How are they going to get into there?
So he says Ricky Dillon goes to Sonny's car and gets the bumper jack out of the trunk.
The four men cautiously approached the back of the moving truck.
When they got there, they found out that it was basically unlocked and easily accessible.
When they opened the door on the van, Ricky Dillon's actually the one that went inside. And they heard some kind of movement, some rustling.
And to their surprise, the victim rolled off his blankets and stood up and said words to the effect, "What the hell are you doing?" And Kendall says that Big Rick attacked the victim, in his words, like a crazy man. Ricky's reaction is not to drop the jack handle and run. Ricky's reaction is to attack this guy. Why would he do that? Fear of identification? Fear of arrest? Fear of the individual? Who knows?
Shortly after that, all he hears is moaning. Ricky hands out a box and says, "Take this." So he gets one box and Sonny Evans gets a box. They take it over to Sonny's car. And then somebody yelled, "There's a man coming."
Carl's boss, Jim Sibbett, had been woken up by the commotion in the trailer. He stepped out of the cab to check things out. But the four thieves managed to escape before Jim laid eyes on them.
Their plan was to just steal something out of the truck or just see what's in there. And it just went wrong from the minute they opened the door.
To Kenda, Eric Kendall's story makes perfect sense. And with his signed confession in tow, Kenda has only one more loose end to tie up. Putting the collar on Big Rick Dillon.
We put the word out on the street that we're looking for him, and we get lots of information. A lot of people don't like him.
Soon, word gets back to Kenda that Rick Dillon is hiding out in his girlfriend's basement.
So we go to the house. I took a tactical team with me to make that arrest because you never know what you're dealing with. We already know he's violent. Ready?
Police, is Ricky Dillon here?
No, he's not.
If you're lying, you're going to jail too.
He's not here.
We got a warrant. Step aside. All right, Duffy, you stay with her. Sit down. Clear the house.
After searching the main floor, Kenda and his tactical team descend into the basement.
So one of the officers who's on the tactical team has a 12-gauge pump shotgun. On the street, the sound of an operating slide and a shotgun being racked is easily identifiable as to what it is.
Hear what that was, Ricky?
I'm coming. Don't shoot.
Put your hands on the ground.
He came out from behind the furnace and we arrested him. We took him into the police department, advised him of his rights, and he invoked, "I want a lawyer." Okay. So we never got a statement from him.
Eric Kendall, Phil Brown, and Sonny Evans agreed to plead guilty to first-degree burglary and testify in the trial against Ricky Dillon. The three of them were sentenced to 5 to 7 years in the state penitentiary. Ricky Dillon was convicted of the first-degree murder,
For the murder of Carl Taylor, Big Rick receives a life sentence in the big house. But even with justice served, it's hard to imagine a worse fate for a decorated veteran like Taylor.
I always felt and still feel sorry for Carl Taylor. What did that guy do to deserve that kind of end of his life? Nothing. All he was trying to do was go to sleep. What he got for his trouble was a violent end.
They got away with, what, one box of supposed Christmas decorations? Why would you do something like that?
It could be learned. Not be so greedy that you have to kill somebody to get the really unimportant things that you're after.
This was brutality without a purpose. If you hated the victim for a long list of reasons, you at least would have some explanation to offer for the level of violence. In this case, the victim is presented seconds before he meets an incredibly violent.
California. 1997. A highway that hums like a power line in the dark. A stretch of asphalt where the ocean fog crawls inland and swallows taillights whole. And a single, ugly detail that refuses to fade with time. A car door left open in the shoulder lane, hazard lights clicking like a metronome, and on the front seat, perfectly folded, too neat for panic, a red windbreaker that still smells faintly of salt and gasoline. No blood. No struggle. No note. Just that jacket, a set of keys still in the ignition, and the cold, empty space where a person should be. The morning it happened, the radio said it would be clear by noon, bright and ordinary, the kind of day that makes everyone believe nothing bad can happen. The missing woman was named Marisol Vega. 26. A dental assistant. The sort of face you'd see in a community flyer and think, she looks like someone I've passed in the grocery aisle. Brown hair pulled back tight for work, hands always smelling like latex gloves and mint. She lived in a small rental off the boulevard, not far from the pier, where tourists bought postcards and locals pretended the pier didn't exist. Her neighbors called her quiet. Her co-workers called her dependable. And the last person who spoke to her, over the phone, at 10:41 p.m., said her voice sounded normal, maybe a little tired, like she'd been standing on her feet all day and just wanted to be home. But she didn't make it home. In the hours after midnight, somebody dialed 911 from a payphone outside a closed liquor store. The caller didn't give a name. Didn't even give a full sentence. Just a location and a phrase, clipped and brittle, there's a car on the 101. Lights on. Door open. Then the line went dead. By the time the first cruiser arrived, the fog had thickened into a white wall. The officer's flashlight beam looked small and helpless against it, a narrow cone cutting through damp air, sweeping across the open door, the empty driver's seat, the jacket, the keys. He called for backup. He called for a tow. He called it in as a possible DUI walk-off. People abandon cars all the time, he said later. People do stupid things, stumble off into the dark, call a friend, sleep it off. He didn't know he was standing at the mouth of a case that would rot for decades. They ran the plates. Marisol Vega. Address on file. No warrants. No tickets. No history that screamed danger. Still, procedure is procedure. They knocked on the door of her apartment at 2:18 a.m., hard enough to wake the whole building. No answer. Her living room lamp was off. No light under the door. Her neighbor across the hall cracked the chain and stared out with one bleary eye, whispering the first line of the story that would later become a headline, "She's not here." At sunrise, the shoulder became a stage. Yellow tape. Flashing lights. Two detectives in rumpled suits leaning over the open door like they could smell the truth. A highway patrolman walking slow in the gravel, eyes down, hunting for footprints, cigarette butts, anything. They found almost nothing. No purse. No wallet. No phone. Back then, not everyone carried one, but Marisol did, a chunky Nokia with a cracked screen. It wasn't in the car. And the strangest part wasn't what was missing. It was what was left behind. The windbreaker folded clean, as if someone had taken time, deliberate time, to smooth the fabric, to square the edges. Not tossed. Not crumpled. Placed. Inside the car, the radio was tuned to a Spanish station, volume low. The passenger seat had a receipt from a gas station dated that night, 9:12 p.m., 20 miles south of her apartment. A half tank of fuel. The odometer didn't match the shortest route home. She'd been somewhere else, driving in loops, making choices that didn't make sense, or following a plan she hadn't shared with anyone. The detectives asked the obvious questions first: boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, jealous co-worker, stranger danger on the highway. They asked her mother, her friends, her boss, the guy who fixed her brakes last month. They asked the neighbors who said they heard nothing. They asked the bartender at the place she sometimes visited on Fridays, and he shook his head and said he hadn't seen her in weeks. They asked the last caller on her phone bill, and he said he was just a cousin, just family, nothing strange. The case began to feel like trying to grab smoke. The community reacted the way communities always do at first, loudly, urgently, like collective panic could force reality to comply. Flyers appeared on poles, on bus stops, on the corkboard at the coffee shop. Marisol Vega. Missing. Call this number. There were candlelight vigils where people held flames in paper cups and stared at the ocean as if it might give her back. Local news ran the story at 6 and 10. A young woman vanished off a major highway. A car abandoned in fog. A folded jacket like a signature. The anchors said words that made everyone sit up straighter: mysterious, unexplained, no suspects. And then, like a drumbeat, the phrase that would follow the case forever: cold case in the making. Detectives worked it hot, at least in the beginning. They canvassed the area around the liquor store payphone, asked about the anonymous 911 call. Nobody remembered seeing anyone. The store's security camera was broken. Of course it was broken. The owner shrugged and said it had been broken for months. They checked the booth anyway. Found fingerprints, dozens, layered like dust. Nothing usable. They pulled call records. A single outgoing call to 911, no identifier. Payphones were perfect for ghosts. They brought in search dogs. The dogs tracked Marisol's scent from the driver's seat down the gravel shoulder, and then, here's the first punch to the gut, straight across the traffic lanes, as if she had walked into moving cars without fear, without hesitation. The dogs kept going, noses low, pulling handlers toward the median, then toward the northbound side, then down an embankment where weeds grew thick and the earth smelled wet. The handlers said later the dogs began to circle, confused, whining, as if the scent had fractured, scattered, disappeared. Like she had been lifted off the ground. Like she had stepped into a hole in the world. They searched anyway. Volunteers with flashlights. Deputies with radios. Helicopters. They combed the brush. They checked the drainage culverts. They peered under overpasses. They found nothing that looked like Marisol. But they did find something else. A length of nylon cord snagged in a thorn bush about 50 yards from the highway, pale blue, frayed at one end, as if it had been cut in a hurry. It didn't belong to any utility work. It didn't match anything in the car. They bagged it. Logged it. And then it sat in evidence, mute and patient, while the case grew teeth. When the press got hold of the cord, the story changed shape. It stopped being a missing person and became a predator story. People started locking doors. Parents started walking their kids to school. Women stopped jogging at dawn. The highway, that lifeline of the coast, began to feel like a throat you could be pulled down. The local paper ran a front-page headline that week that still circulates in old clippings: "Woman vanishes into fog. Strange clues baffle police." It sold out by noon. Then came the first false lead, the kind that feels like relief until it turns to ash. A truck driver called in to say he'd seen a woman matching Marisol's description standing near the open car around 1:30 a.m., waving her arms like she was signaling for help. He said a dark SUV slowed nearby, then accelerated, and he assumed she'd gotten inside. He didn't get the plate. He couldn't describe the driver. He was tired. He was on a schedule. He kept going. Detectives pressed him, asked him to draw the SUV, asked if it had a spare tire mounted on the back, if it had roof racks, if it had a dent. He shook his head and stared at his hands and said, "It was dark. It was fog. I saw what I saw." They put out an alert anyway. Every dark SUV in the county became a suspect. Tips poured in. Hundreds. Thousands. A neighbor's cousin's friend saw a woman at a diner. A clerk at a motel checked in a scared-looking girl. A man in a parking lot asked a stranger for directions, and she looked like the missing girl. None of it held. It was noise, desperate and well-meaning and useless. Behind the noise, the detectives started to build the only thing they could, a timeline. Marisol left work at 6:05 p.m. She stopped at a grocery store at 6:23, bought oranges, pasta, a cheap bouquet of daisies. The cashier remembered her because Marisol paid in cash and smiled like she had good news. At 7:40, she made a call from her apartment line to her mother, short, under 3 minutes. Her mother said Marisol mentioned she was going to clear her head. Not a fight. Not a crisis. Just those words, casual, like brushing teeth. At 8:50, she was seen at the gas station. A clerk remembered the red jacket. At 10:41, the phone call with her cousin. At some point after that, her car ended up on the 101, door open, lights clicking. And somewhere between those points, the air turned thick and the story turned violent. The daisies were never found. They weren't in the apartment. They weren't in the car. The oranges and pasta were still in the fridge days later, untouched. So she had come home. Briefly. Long enough to put groceries away. Long enough to make the place look normal. And then she left again, taking nothing that mattered, no coat besides that windbreaker, no purse, no phone charger, no makeup bag, no toothbrush, just the phone itself, if she even took it, and maybe the daisies, if those daisies meant something. Detectives pulled her trash. They pulled her bank statements. Nothing unusual. No big withdrawals. No secret credit cards. They checked her diary. Just a small spiral notebook on the kitchen counter with grocery lists and appointment reminders and one line that made an entire room go quiet when they read it out loud. If he calls again, don't answer. No name. No date. No explanation. Just that sentence, ink pressed hard enough to bruise the paper. They asked her mother who he might be. Her mother frowned, confused, and said Marisol hadn't mentioned anyone. They asked co-workers. They asked friends. A friend hesitated, then admitted Marisol had complained about someone weird, who lingered near the clinic sometimes, a man who asked questions about her schedule like it was casual conversation. The clinic had no security footage. No one remembered his face clearly. The friend could only offer the shape of him, tall, maybe, dark hair, maybe. Another ghost. And then, 2 weeks after she vanished, the ocean spat up something small and ugly on a stretch of beach 20 miles north, a single sneaker, white with a green stripe, size 7. It looked like the kind Marisol wore. The laces were tied. Sand packed into the sole. When the detective held it up, the wind snapped the tongue like a slap. They didn't confirm it publicly, not right away, but word traveled faster than press releases. They found her shoe, people whispered. They found a piece of her. The case stepped over an invisible line. It wasn't just missing anymore. It was hunting. Forensics couldn't pull much from the sneaker. Salt water had scrubbed it clean. No DNA. No fibers. Just a shoe that might be hers and might be nothing. But the psychological damage was immediate. The town began to carry Marisol in its throat, like a swallowed stone. Every foggy night felt personal. Every closed curtain felt like a warning. The detectives returned to the highway, again and again, looking for the detail they'd missed. In the gravel near the shoulder, a crime scene tech finally noticed faint gouges, parallel marks, like something heavy had been dragged. Not long. Just a few feet, ending abruptly. The pattern was inconsistent, as if whatever it was had been lifted before it left a clear trail. They took casts. They photographed. They compared. They found no match. Still, the image stuck. Something dragged, then picked up. A body. A bag. A person unconscious. Or a piece of equipment. It could be anything, which is another way of saying it could be the worst thing. By the end of the first month, the tips dried up. The vigils stopped. The flyers faded in the sun. The investigation team shrank. The case file thickened into a binder that felt heavier every time someone picked it up. And somewhere in that binder, the nylon cord sat like a coiled question. The folded jacket sat like a taunt. The line in the notebook sat like a whisper from the edge of something Marisol never got to explain. If he calls again, don't answer. Because the cruelest part of this kind of story isn't the violence you can prove. It's the silence that follows. The gap where a life used to be. The way the ordinary world keeps moving, cars still racing along the 101, fog still rolling in, radios still playing soft music, while one name becomes a symbol, then a rumor, then a cold case. And in the years that followed, people would swear they heard things. Someone saw a red windbreaker in a thrift store. Someone found daisies on a grave with no name. Someone remembered a dark SUV idling near the clinic with its lights off. But the file stayed open, and the question stayed sharp. And every time the ocean fog slid over the highway at night, it looked less like weather and more like a curtain being pulled, hiding whatever happened to Marisol Vega the moment her car door opened and the world decided not to tell anyone why. The fog didn't just roll in after Marisol vanished, it moved into people's houses, into their lungs, into the way they looked at each other at stoplights, and it made the highway feel alive, like it had teeth, like it had learned it could take something and never give it back, and the detectives felt it too every time they drove out to that shoulder and stared at the gravel as if it might blink and confess. They stopped calling it a missing person case in the hallway where other cops could hear, not because policy changed on paper, but because the language changed in their mouths, because there's a moment in every investigation when hope starts to sound naive, when optimism becomes a liability you can't afford, and the case starts to smell like a crime even before you can prove it. They laid out the evidence on a metal table under fluorescent lights that made everything look sick. The folded windbreaker sealed in plastic, the nylon cord in its own bag, the sneaker wrapped like a relic, the casts of those faint gouges, the gas receipt, the notebook with the one sentence that felt like a scream muffled under a pillow, and they asked the question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What kind of person folds a jacket at a roadside abduction scene? Who takes time for neatness when adrenaline should be burning the world down? The first real suspect arrived like they always do, not with a confession, but with a pattern. A patrol sergeant slid a thin folder across the desk and said there'd been a similar incident 2 counties up. 2 years earlier, a woman pulled over at night, lights on, a man offering help, and when she leaned out to listen he grabbed her wrist, tried to haul her toward the passenger door, and she fought like hell, scratched him, screamed, and he ran. No arrest. No ID. Just a description and a feeling. Dark SUV. Male. Late 20s to 40s. Calm voice. The kind of predator that doesn't roar, just speaks softly and expects obedience. They printed out the report. They circled details. They wrote possible link in thick marker and pinned it to the board, and it felt like progress until they realized possible is just a polite word for we have nothing. They brought Marisol's car into the impound bay and treated it like a body on a slab. Glove prints dusted on the steering wheel. Fibers lifted from the seat seams. The trunk emptied inch by inch. The upholstery peeled back. The techs found a partial palm print on the inside edge of the driver's door where someone might have pulled it open, and for a minute the room went quiet. Because a print is something you can chase. Something you can feed into a database and turn into a name. But it was smeared. Not enough points. The computer spit it back like a bad joke. They found a single long dark hair on the passenger floor mat, but no root, no DNA profile back, then that could give you certainty. Just a strand that could belong to a stranger, or to Marisol herself. They found a faint scuff mark on the lower dashboard, like a shoe had kicked there, an awkward angle, as if someone had twisted. They found a tiny flake of blue paint, smaller than a fingernail clipping, lodged in the rubber seal near the trunk hinge, and it looked too bright to belong to her car, too fresh, like a foreign color, in the wrong body. The blue paint got its own envelope, its own barcode, its own promise. The detectives walked it down to the lab like it was fragile truth. Paint can mean contact. Contact can mean collision. Collision can mean a vehicle. A vehicle can mean a suspect. It was a chain you could almost see. They asked the lab to analyze the layers, the chemical profile, the type, the year range. The tech said it might take weeks. Weeks in a case like this is an eternity. In those weeks, Marisol's mother stopped sleeping. Her eyes turned red and flat. She kept the phone next to her like a gun, jumping at every ring. Her father began driving the highway at night, slow, scanning the shoulder, stopping where he shouldn't, stepping into brush with a flashlight like he could find his daughter's name written on a rock. Friends took shifts at the apartment, sitting on the couch, talking softly, trying to keep the place warm. The daisies never came back. People started bringing flowers to her mother's porch anyway, piling them up until they wilted, until the smell of dying petals became part of the neighborhood. The detectives pushed into Marisol's life the way you push into a locked room, looking for the hidden door. They interviewed again, deeper, harsher, no more gentle questions. Who did she fear? Who did she owe? Who did she love? Who did she hate? The clinic staff said she'd been uneasy lately, glancing out the window between patients, asking someone to walk her to her car at night. The receptionist said a man had called twice in the past month and hung up when she answered, breathing heavy, not speaking. The dentist said Marisol had asked about transferring to a different location, maybe moving inland. Her mother said Marisol had been distant, quiet in a way that felt guarded, like she was holding something behind her teeth. A friend finally admitted Marisol had gone on one date with a man named Devin, a guy she met at a bar, charming at first, then intense, the kind who asks where you are at all times and calls it concern. She'd ended it. He'd kept calling. If he calls again, don't answer, the notebook said, and suddenly, he had a face, even if it was only half a face. They found Devin. He worked construction. He lived with roommates in a crowded house, with beer cans on the porch, and a pit bull that barked like it wanted blood. He opened the door in a tank top, sunburned, eyes narrowed, already defensive. He said he barely knew her. He said he hadn't seen her in months. He said he didn't own an SUV. He said he'd been at work early the morning the car was found. He said, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, that people disappear all the time, and the detective's jaw clenched, because sometimes arrogance is just a mask for fear, and sometimes it's the real thing. They asked for his alibi. He provided a co-worker. The co-worker confirmed. They asked to look at his hands. No fresh scratches. They asked if he'd ever been on Highway 101 that night. He shrugged. Everyone's on the 101. They asked about his phone records. He said get a warrant. They did. His phone records showed calls to Marisol's apartment line 2 nights before she vanished. Short. No answer. One call the night she vanished, at 9:58 p.m., right around the time she was on the road. The call lasted 12 seconds. Then nothing. 12 seconds is long enough to say hello. Long enough to say meet me. Long enough to say you owe me. Long enough to say I'm watching. Devin said it was a mistake, a pocket dial, an accident. The detective stared at him and felt the case tilt, because accidents don't happen on schedule. They brought him in for a polygraph. He refused. Refusal isn't guilt, but in the public mind it might as well be. Someone tipped off the local paper, and suddenly Devin was a headline, his name whispered in supermarkets, his face imagined in the fog. He got fired. He got into fights. He threatened to sue. He called the detectives and screamed that they were ruining his life. The detective listened and said nothing, because a missing woman's life had already been ruined, and that was the only fact that mattered. They searched Devin's room with a warrant. They found porn magazines. A hunting knife. A coil of nylon cord in a toolbox, pale blue, same color as the one snagged in the thorn bush. The detectives exchanged a look that felt like electricity. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a rhyme, and rhymes in homicide are never comforting. They bagged the cord. They measured its weave. They compared the fibers under magnification. The lab tech came back with the first taste of real, bitter information, similar composition, similar dye, mass-produced, sold at hardware stores across the state. Common as dirt. Devin smirked when they told him. Everybody's got rope, he said. You gonna arrest Home Depot? Still, the cord gave them a direction. They pulled receipts from hardware stores near Devin's job sites. They looked for purchases. They found none. They canvassed anyway. No one remembered him buying cord. No one remembered anything, because who remembers a man buying cord in 1997 unless you already know it's part of a nightmare? While they chased Devin, other shadows gathered. A woman called in and said she'd been followed that same week by a dark SUV, headlights off, creeping behind her as she drove home. She said she'd pulled into a gas station, and the SUV parked across from her and just watched. She described a man inside, leaning forward, face lit by the dashboard glow. She couldn't describe features, just a sense of cold attention. She said the SUV left when she went inside. She hadn't reported it then because nothing happened. Now, with Marisol gone, everything felt like it might have been a warning. Detectives took her statement. They asked for the gas station location. They checked for cameras. Broken. Always broken. Another tip came from a tow truck driver, who said he'd been called to a breakdown on the 101 a month before Marisol disappeared, and when he arrived there was a woman standing alone and a man nearby who insisted he'd handle it, told the driver to leave, offered cash. The driver said the woman's eyes looked wrong, like she wanted to speak, but couldn't. The driver left anyway. He regretted it later. Regret doesn't build cases, but it sure as hell builds ghosts. Detectives asked for a description. Dark SUV. Calm voice. A pattern that stayed just out of reach. Then the lab report on the blue paint came in, and it hit the desk like a bullet. The paint chip wasn't from a random object. It was automotive. A specific kind of metallic blue used on a certain make, certain model years, limited range. The report narrowed it down, likely mid-1990s, likely a popular SUV line that flooded California highways in that era. The detective exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for a month. Now they had something that wasn't just a feeling. Now they had a color and a body shape and a time frame. They pushed the information out to patrol units. They asked for any vehicles with front-end damage, rear damage, any collision reports near the highway that week. They started pulling DMV records, a mountain of them, and the mountain laughed at them because there were thousands, tens of thousands, endless blue SUVs driven by endless men. But one report stood out. A minor collision logged 6 days after Marisol vanished. A metallic blue SUV clipped a guardrail on a rural road not far from where the sneaker was found. The driver reported slick conditions, claimed he lost control. No injuries. Minimal damage. The officer who wrote the report noted the driver seemed agitated, asked multiple times if he could leave, refused to make eye contact. The driver's name was Paul R. Hanley. 34. Lives inland. Prior record, DUI, assault charge dropped, restraining order filed by an ex and later dismissed. The file smelled wrong, not because it screamed monster, but because it whispered problem. Detectives drove to Hanley's address. A small property outside town, set back from the road, trees thick enough to hide things. A chain-link fence. A garage with the door half down like a lid. They approached, hearts doing that quiet, hard thump you feel before a door opens. Hanley answered in a bathrobe, hair wet, eyes too bright. He smiled too fast. He said he'd been expecting someone. The detective asked about the collision. Hanley said it was nothing. The detective asked about his SUV. Hanley said it was in the shop. The detective asked which shop. Hanley hesitated. I don't remember, he said, and the air turned colder, because people remember where they take their car when they're afraid of being caught. They asked for consent to search. He refused. They asked him to come down to the station for an interview. He refused. They left, but not really. They parked up the road and watched his house like it might sprout answers. That night, a neighbor called in and said Hanley was loading things into his SUV under a tarp, moving fast, looking around like he'd heard something behind him. Detectives rolled in. Too late. The driveway was empty. The house was dark. The garage door was shut. A man with a metallic blue SUV, and a thin file of violence had evaporated into the same air that had swallowed Marisol. A missing suspect is a wound all its own. It turns a case into an obsession. The detectives hit the phones, called every county, every highway patrol post, every motel, every friend Hanley ever had. They learned he had a brother in Nevada. They learned he'd once worked a seasonal job near the coast. They learned he liked driving at night. They learned he'd been seen at a bar not far from Marisol's clinic months earlier, nursing drinks alone, watching women come and go. They learned, too late, that his ex had once told a friend, "He scares me when he gets quiet." Quiet men don't always mean danger, but in this case quiet felt like camouflage. They eventually found Hanley's SUV 3 days later, abandoned behind a motel off an interstate interchange, the kind of place with flickering signage and carpets that smell like bleach and old cigarettes. The metallic blue paint was dull under the streetlight. The front bumper had fresh scuffs. The rear quarter panel had a smear that looked like it had brushed something. Inside, the seats were vacuumed clean. Too clean. The floor mats looked recently washed. The trunk was empty except for a spare tire and a single damp towel that smelled like chemical cleaner. He'd erased it. He'd scrubbed it like he was scrubbing a sin. They still processed it. They still dusted. They still lifted fibers and hair and tiny fragments of skin. Back then, it was like trying to read a book with half the letters missing. No Marisol. No phone. No daisies. No confession. Just another abandoned vehicle, another door to nowhere, and the detectives felt the net tearing under their hands. The community didn't know the details, but they sensed the shift, the way police cruisers began to move with a different urgency, the way the newspapers' tone sharpened. New suspect vanishes as search intensifies, one headline screamed, and people stared at it over breakfast like the words might bite. Marisol's mother stood on her porch that week with a stack of flyers, handing them to strangers with trembling hands, her voice raw, repeating the same sentence until it sounded like a prayer and a curse at once. Please. If you know something. Please. Winter edged in. The fog thickened. The tips turned colder. Detectives kept driving that stretch of 101, kept staring at the shoulder where the hazard lights had clicked like a countdown, kept imagining Marisol standing there, jacket folded, keys in the ignition, a moment of decision, a voice in the dark saying something that sounded helpful and wasn't. And in the quiet hours, after the interviews, after the paperwork, after the case board stared back with its photos and strings like a spider web, they could feel the case slipping toward that word nobody wants to speak, the word that turns living people into files, unsolved. But the highway didn't forget. The ocean didn't forget. And somewhere, in the space between fog and asphalt, the truth sat waiting, not dead, not gone, just hidden well enough to make an entire town doubt its own daylight. The metallic blue SUV sat behind that motel like a carcass drained of blood, and the detectives knew the feeling in their stomach wasn't triumph, it was hunger, because finding a cleaned vehicle is like finding a mouth wiped after the meal, and all you can do is stare at the spotless teeth and ask yourself who taught him to erase so neatly. They towed it under escort, lights flashing on empty streets, and in the impound bay the air smelled like detergent and old rubber, the kind of smell that clings to places where evidence dies slowly. They peeled back the seats, pried up plastic panels, ran gloved fingers along seams, searching for the one speck a man in a hurry forgets, the one thread that doesn't wash out, the one hair that wedges under a bolt, and every time a tech leaned back and shook their head, the room got a shade darker. Still, the lab pulled something, two things, really, so small they felt like insults. 1. A partial latent print on the inside of the rear door frame, too smeared to match, but clear enough to say someone else had been there. 2. A trace of sand and plant debris caught deep in the trunk latch, grit that didn't match inland roads, grit that smelled faintly like the coast. The detectives drove back to the shoulder on the 101 and held that sand between their fingers like it might be holy. Wind scraped across the embankment, carrying salt, carrying the distant roar of surf. The coast has its own language, foam, fog, rust, the constant pounding that makes everything feel temporary, and that language was now tied to Marisol Vega whether anyone liked it or not. They followed the scent of coastal grit north and south on maps, drawing circles around beaches and pullouts and secluded turnoffs where a vehicle could stop unseen. They photographed every access road. They sent units to check ravines, cliffs, scrubland that dropped away from the highway like an open mouth. They searched again and again, because repetition is what you do when you can't admit you're lost. And then the phone became a phantom. Not Marisol's phone, hers had vanished like her, but Hanley's. They subpoenaed his records. Back then, cell towers weren't precise needles. They were wide nets, and a man could slip through. Still, the records told a story in jagged timestamps. On the night Marisol disappeared, Hanley's phone hit a tower corridor that ran uncomfortably close to Highway 101 between 10:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. It didn't prove anything by itself. People travel. Phones roam. But it was a coincidence with sharp edges. Then, in the days after, his phone went dark for hours at a time, then reappeared along inland routes, then vanished again. And on the morning he abandoned the SUV behind that motel, his phone made one last call, 47 seconds, to a prepaid number registered to nobody. They traced the prepaid number to a convenience store kiosk. No cameras. No receipt. Cash purchase. A faceless lifeline. The detectives leaned over the phone logs like gamblers reading cards, looking for a tell. 47 seconds. Long enough to say, I need help. Long enough to say, I'm in trouble. Long enough to say, get rid of it. They tried to turn it into a name anyway. They pulled records of other calls hitting that prepaid number. They found one recurring contact. A landline tied to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Storage units are where secrets go to breathe. Rows of metal doors, numbered like prison cells, a place where people stash furniture, and also the pieces of themselves they can't keep at home. Detectives drove out with a warrant and the kind of quiet adrenaline that makes your fingertips go cold. The manager met them at the gate, chewing gum too hard, eyes wide. We don't get much trouble, he said, like he was trying to convince himself. They asked for the unit tied to Hanley's account. The manager walked them down the corridor and stopped at a door with peeling paint, Unit 38. When they rolled it up, the smell hit first, dust, mildew, oil, old cardboard. Inside sat the bare bones of a life, a mattress on the floor, stained and lopsided, a folding chair, empty beer bottles, a toolbox, and in the far corner, covered with a tarp, something bulky. The detectives pulled the tarp back and found a motorcycle frame, stripped, half disassembled. No blood. No clothing. No human trace. But on the floor, near the toolbox, there was a pile of nylon cord, pale blue, coiled in a messy heap, and suddenly the room felt smaller, because here was that color again, that cheap hardware store blue that kept turning up like a signature written in thread. They bagged it, of course. They also found a Polaroid camera in a cardboard box, and a stack of photos banded with a rubber band. There are moments in investigations when time slows, when everyone in the room hears their own pulse. This was one of them. The lead detective slid the rubber band off and flipped through the photos one by one. Most were ordinary, camping trips, a barbecue, a dog, a group shot outside a bar. Then the tone shifted. The last few were taken at night, flash-blasted, harsh. A roadside. A guardrail. A close-up of a car's rear quarter panel reflecting light. A red shape in the frame that could have been a jacket, or could have been a flare, or could have been nothing at all. And the final photo, blurred, crooked, showed a woman's face partially obscured by shadow, eyes wide, mouth open as if speaking or shouting. They couldn't confirm it was Marisol. The photo was grainy, the angle wrong, the flash overexposed the cheek. But the hairline, the jaw, the shape of the nose, close enough to make everyone in that storage unit feel sick. They rushed it to the lab. They compared it to Marisol's driver's license photo, to her clinic ID, to her mother's family albums. The analyst wouldn't give certainty. Could be, she said. Could be someone else. And could be is the word that makes families break. They found Hanley that same week, sort of. A park ranger called in a body discovered in a dry riverbed 30 miles east. Male. Mid-30s. Decomposed. No wallet. No ID. A rope nearby, pale blue, tied to a tree branch overhead. The headline wrote itself before the autopsy even finished. Suspect found dead in riverbed. The community's stomach flipped between relief and horror. Relief because maybe the monster was gone. Horror because dead suspects don't talk. But the coroner's report killed that headline with a single cold line. The deceased was not Paul R. Hanley. Dental records didn't match. The body belonged to a transient with no connection to the case, another lost person swallowed by California's vast margins. The rope, the blue rope, was common. It meant nothing and everything, another coincidence dressed as a clue. Hanley remained a living absence. And the deeper the detectives pushed, the more the case began to resemble a hall of mirrors. The Polaroid photo, maybe Marisol, maybe not, leaked anyway. Someone at the station whispered to someone who whispered to someone, and soon the image was described on radio talk shows and in bar conversations, each retelling sharpening the horror. They've got a picture of her, people said. He kept trophies. Marisol's mother demanded to see it. Detectives refused at first, then relented under pressure, because sometimes compassion is a blade too. She looked at the photo in a fluorescent-lit room, hands trembling, and she didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just stared for a long time and then whispered, "That's her." The detective watched her face and knew what he was seeing wasn't certainty. It was grief reaching for any shape it could hold. The prosecutor reviewed the evidence and frowned. Without a body, without DNA, without a witness who could place Hanley with Marisol, there was no case to take to trial. Suspect or not, he was still a man, and the law doesn't convict shadows. The detectives knew that. They also knew the public didn't care. The public wanted a villain with a name, and Hanley was the closest thing they had. His face was printed on flyers now, not as missing, but as wanted. His ex went into hiding after reporters camped outside her job. The storage unit manager stopped answering his phone after the second death threat. The case became a pressure cooker, and under that pressure the cracks spread. A bartender came forward, months late, and said he remembered Hanley. Said he'd been at the bar near the clinic the week Marisol vanished. Said he'd talked about the coast like it was an itch under his skin. Said he'd asked the bartender if there were quiet pullouts on 101 where you could park and watch the fog. The bartender laughed at the time. Now it wasn't funny. Detectives asked why he waited. The bartender shrugged, ashamed. Didn't think it mattered, he said. In a case like this, everything matters and nothing helps. Then a tow yard clerk called in with a detail that seemed too small to matter, until it landed right in the center of everything. The clerk said, in the week after Marisol disappeared, a metallic blue SUV had been dropped off late at night for a quick bumper repair, cash paid, no paperwork. The clerk remembered because the driver insisted on waiting, pacing, smoking, watching the shop doors like a man guarding a secret. The clerk couldn't swear it was Hanley. He could only say the man was about his height, his build. A shadow wearing the right shape. The shop no longer had records. The security tape had been overwritten. Time, again, doing its quiet work of erasure. By the end of that year, the investigation had split into two emotional realities. Inside the department, the case was a file that bled resources, a board of photos and strings that never resolved into a clean picture. Outside, in the town, it was a wound people poked every time the fog rolled in, every time a young woman didn't answer her phone, every time headlights appeared behind them on an empty road. Marisol's name became shorthand for fear. Parents used it like a warning. Don't stop on the highway, they'd tell their daughters. Don't accept help from strangers. Don't get out of the car. Years began to stack up like layers of dust. Detectives changed assignments. One retired. Another transferred. The lead detective kept the file in his desk, heavier every season, and sometimes he'd open it late at night and stare at the photos. Marisol smiling in her clinic scrubs, Marisol at a family barbecue, Marisol holding a bouquet of daisies that might have been those missing flowers, or maybe not. And he'd think about that folded jacket on the seat, the neatness of it, the control. And he'd feel anger rise like bile because whoever did this had time, had calm, had the arrogance to arrange the scene. Like a message. In 2001, a new technology began to creep into the lab, and the old evidence bags were suddenly not just dead weight, but sleeping possibilities. The nylon cord came back out. The windbreaker came back out. The sneaker came back out. The investigators hoped for DNA in places they'd once ignored, inside seams, under tags, in knots. They found partial profiles, mixtures, the kind of results that don't point like arrows but like foghorns, loud and directionless. One partial profile from the inside cuff of the windbreaker suggested contact with an unknown male. Not enough to match anyone in the database. Not enough to name Hanley. Not enough to convict anyone. Just enough to keep the case from dying. Then, in 2004, a man was arrested in Oregon for a roadside abduction attempt. Same script. Offer help. Calm voice. Late night highway. The victim fought and escaped. He drove a metallic blue SUV. Detectives felt the old jolt. They called Oregon. They traded notes. The man's name was not Hanley. He had no known connection to California. But when they compared details, they found similarities that made the skin prickle. The rope found in his trunk was pale blue nylon. The victim said he'd folded her jacket and placed it on the hood of her car while he checked the engine, like a gentleman performing a ritual. The detectives stared at that line in the report and felt something cold settle into their bones, because rituals don't happen by accident. Rituals mean habit. Habit means repetition. They flew up to interview him. He denied everything. He smiled like Devin had smiled, like Hanley had smiled, like men smile when they believe the world is a game and they have the rules. He said he'd never been to their town. He said he'd never heard of Marisol Vega. He said, almost casually, lots of women go missing. The detective walked out of the interview room and gripped the hallway rail, fighting the urge to put his fist through drywall. They never proved a link. The Oregon case went forward on its own. The man was convicted for what they could prove, not what they suspected. And Marisol's file went back into the drawer, thicker now, more haunted, the kind of file that seems to hum when you open it, because it contains a story that refuses to end. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Marisol's mother stopped hoping in the way people understand hope. She didn't stop loving. She didn't stop waiting. But the waiting changed. It became quieter, heavier, like carrying a bucket of water every day without spilling, knowing you'll never reach the place you're walking to. She kept the same phone number for years. She kept Marisol's room the same. She kept the daisies on the kitchen table even when they wilted, replacing them with fresh ones like a ritual of her own, because if the world had rituals of violence, she would answer with rituals of devotion. And still, every few months, the case flared. A reported sighting. A confession letter that turned out to be a prank. A psychic tip that led to nothing. A skull found in the desert that belonged to someone else. A ring pulled from a creek that wasn't hers. Each time, the town held its breath, and each time, the breath escaped with a hiss, and the case remained what it always was, a corridor with doors that open onto empty rooms. But the most unsettling thing, the thing that kept the detectives awake long after they should have learned to sleep, was the idea that Hanley might still be out there, not dead in a riverbed, not buried in the desert, but alive, moving, changing his name, buying rope at a different hardware store, folding someone else's jacket with the same careful hands, driving a different colored SUV under different skies. The case wasn't just about what happened to Marisol Vega anymore. It was about what could happen again, and that fear, thin, electric, constant, hung over the coastline like fog that never fully burns off, even at noon, even in bright sunlight, even when the ocean looks calm, because calm is what predators love most, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between headlights and shadows, the story of 1997 kept breathing, waiting for the one mistake that would finally let the truth step into the light. The coastline learned to live with a permanent flinch, the kind you don't notice until you catch it in a window reflection, the way your shoulders lift when a car slows behind you at night, the way your hand checks the lock twice, the way your eyes measure strangers like you're doing math you never studied, and in the police department the case lived the same way, quietly, aggressively, always there, because the file didn't close, it just sank deeper into the building, into the cabinets, into the bones of the detectives who'd touched it, and every now and then it surfaced with a new bruise, a new rumor, a new dead end that still managed to feel like a punch. The lead detective started carrying two versions of the story in his head at once, one where Marisol stepped out of that car and into darkness, and never came back, and another where she was still somewhere, breathing, waiting, surviving, and both versions were poison because one was unbearable and the other was impossible. And impossibility is a slow torture when it wears the mask of hope. It was 2007 when the case shifted again, not from a confession or a body, but from bureaucracy, from a grant, from the dull machinery of law enforcement that sometimes, accidentally, makes miracles. A state-funded cold case initiative arrived with a clipboard, a budget line, and a list of evidence lockers that hadn't been opened in years, and suddenly the Vega file wasn't just a tragedy. It was a candidate. They pulled boxes. They logged chain of custody like a prayer. They re-entered fingerprints that hadn't matched anything in the 90s, because the databases had grown fat with new arrests and new digitized prints, millions more hands in the system. They re-swabbed the windbreaker's inner seams, the zipper pull, the cuffs where someone might have gripped fabric hard enough to leave skin cells without even knowing. They re-examined the nylon cord under better microscopes, looking for rare fibers, for contaminants, for a manufacturing marker that could point to a batch, a store, a region. They ran the unknown male partial profile again, not expecting much, because expectation is dangerous, but still hoping for that one moment when a computer says what a case has been waiting decades to hear, match. The computer did speak. Not with a name, not with a clean hit, but with a thin, sharp notification, an association. The partial profile didn't match a person, but it matched another case's evidence profile, another unknown male sample taken from a different crime scene years later, 200 miles away, another roadside incident where a woman was pulled over, approached by a man offering help, and she survived only because she ran into traffic screaming and a semi-driver stopped. The attacker vanished. The victim couldn't describe his face, only his voice, calm, measured, almost polite, and one detail that haunted the report like a stain, while she was fighting him, her jacket slipped off her shoulders, and he snatched it, folded it once, like he couldn't stand disorder even in violence, and then he threw it aside and grabbed again. When the cold case team read that, the air in the room changed. This wasn't a coincidence you could laugh off. This was a behavioral fingerprint. A ritual with repetition. They pulled the other case file. They compared. Same coastal corridor. Same hours. Similar vehicle description, SUV, dark, possibly blue. Similar nylon cord found later near the scene, cheap and pale. And now, linked by biology, by a microscopic signature carried on skin. They called the other department. They shared notes. They spoke in the careful, wary language detectives use when they're trying not to scare themselves. We might have a series, one of them said, and it landed like a cinder in dry grass. A series means a predator who didn't stop. A series means the question changes from what happened to her to how many. A series means there are other mothers waiting. The cold case team built a map. Red pins for attempted abductions. Black pins for missing women whose disappearances had been filed as runaways or accidents, or voluntary absence, because sometimes the system labels pain as choice when it can't explain it. The pins clustered along highways, along coastal routes, along the skeleton of California where people move fast and disappear faster. Most of the cases were too thin to connect, but a few had the same smell: abandoned cars with doors open, personal items left behind, no clear struggle, and in one case, a folded sweatshirt placed on a hood like an offering. They dug into Paul R. Hanley again, because his name still sat there like a thorn. They searched national databases for any trace, credit cards, DMV renewals, arrest records under his name. Nothing. They looked for aliases using his birth date, his social security number, his known associates. The search came back empty like a dry well. Then they widened it, because predators don't just vanish into air, they become someone else, and becoming someone else leaves ripples. They pulled marriage records. They pulled property records. They pulled employment records. And one analyst, buried in spreadsheets, found something that made the hairs on his arms rise. A man in Arizona had applied for a contractor's license under the name Peter Hale, and the application listed a previous employer in California, one that matched a job Hanley had held years before. The signature on the application, scanned and stored, had the same slant as Hanley's signature on his collision report, the same way the P curved like a hook. A signature isn't DNA. It's not a fingerprint. It's art. But it's also habit, and habit is hard to kill. Detectives drove the comparison to a forensic document examiner. The examiner returned a cautious conclusion: high probability of common authorship. High probability is not certainty, but it's enough to move a case out of the drawer and into the street. They flew to Arizona with a photograph of Hanley and a quiet rage that had aged into something hard. The man called Peter Hale lived in a stucco house outside Phoenix, neat yard, trimmed shrubs, the kind of place where you'd never imagine a secret screaming under the paint. He had a wife. 2 stepkids. He coached a youth baseball team on weekends. He had neighbors who waved and said he was solid, helpful, quiet. Quiet again. Always quiet. Detectives sat in an unmarked car across the street and watched him leave for work in the morning, watching the way he checked his mirrors, the way his shoulders moved, the way he carried his body like a man who didn't want to be surprised. It looked like Hanley. It could have been Hanley. And that could have made their mouths go dry. They approached him at a job site where the sun baked rebar into shimmering lines. He was wearing a hard hat, tool belt, dust on his forearms. They introduced themselves. They watched his eyes. The moment they said, California, something flickered in his face like a light bulb catching for a fraction of a second, too fast for most people to see, but detectives live on fractions. He asked what this was about. His voice was calm. Too calm. They said his old name. Paul R. Hanley. The hard hat didn't move, but his throat did, a swallow. He smiled and said, "You've got the wrong guy." They didn't arrest him. They couldn't. Not yet. No warrant. No charge. No body. They asked him to come in for an interview. He refused with a politeness that felt rehearsed. They asked for a DNA sample. He refused. "I have rights," he said, and he was right, and that was the problem. They left, but they didn't really leave. They started surveillance. They pulled trash from his curb at night like thieves. They sent coffee cups and discarded napkins to the lab. And when the results came back, the room went so silent it felt like the walls were listening. No match. Not to the unknown male profile from the windbreaker. Not to the linked attempted abduction case. Peter Hale's DNA was clean of that particular signature. It didn't mean he wasn't a monster. It meant he wasn't the monster they were chasing, at least not with the evidence they had. The detectives stared at the report like it was betrayal written in ink. They had wanted a face. They had wanted to end it. Instead they were back in the fog, and somewhere a predator was still faceless. The disappointment turned into urgency, because now they understood something they hadn't fully admitted before. They weren't hunting a single man. They were hunting a method. A calm voice. A staged scene. A folded garment. Nylon cord. An SUV that could blend into traffic like a drop of ink in the ocean. And the method was bigger than any one suspect. It was the kind of thing that can survive arrests, outlive evidence, travel across counties and decades, because it only requires one human decision, to stop, to trust, to open a door. They brought the survivor from the linked case into a quiet room, and asked her to remember what she'd spent years trying to forget. Trauma memory is a broken mirror, and the detectives knew they were asking her to cut herself on it. She told them she'd been driving alone at night, late shift, and she'd seen flashing hazard lights behind her. A car pulled over ahead like it was already in trouble. She said she slowed instinctively. She said she saw a man standing near the open hood of his SUV, waving her down like he needed help. She said she stopped because she felt guilty passing, because the world trains women to be kind even when kindness is dangerous. The man approached her window and spoke softly. He told her there was debris in the road up ahead, that she'd blown a tire, that he'd seen sparks. He said he could help. She said she didn't see a flat. He said, "It's the left rear, trust me." And she said the moment she stepped out, he moved behind her too fast, like he'd been waiting for her weight to shift, and he pressed something into her back that could have been a knife, could have been a gun, could have been just his fist, and he whispered, "Don't scream." The detectives asked about his hands. She said they were strong and clean, nails short, no dirt, like he cared about being tidy. They asked about his smell. She said he smelled like soap and cigarettes. They asked about his jacket folding. She said it wasn't a full fold like laundry, it was a quick, practiced motion, like he didn't want it underfoot, like he needed space to work. Space to work. That phrase hung in the room like a noose. They went back to Marisol's scene and tried to look at it through that survivor's eyes. The abandoned car, the open door, the folded windbreaker, the keys left in place like the driver would return in a minute. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt engineered. A stage set to attract either a helper or a victim. A trap that could catch multiple kinds of people. If Marisol had stopped to help someone else, she might have been the Good Samaritan who walked into the net. If Marisol had been the one with trouble, she might have been the vulnerable person who accepted help. Either way, the method fed on the same thing, the human instinct to believe the next person is safe until proven otherwise. And then, like the case was listening, like the fog itself was angry at being studied, another incident hit the wire. 2010. A woman reported an attempted abduction near a coastal interchange. Same story, hazard lights, a vehicle stopped, a man waving. She didn't stop. She called 911. She watched in her mirror as the man got into his SUV and followed her for 3 exits, lights off, staying just far enough back to pretend coincidence. When she pulled into a crowded gas station, he didn't approach. He simply parked at the far edge and watched. She described him as ordinary, and that was the worst part. Ordinary means invisible. The responding officer wrote it up as suspicious vehicle. The report would have died in a stack if the cold case team hadn't been combing for patterns like miners digging through rock. They pulled surveillance footage from that gas station. Grainy. Night. Glare. But there it was, an SUV, dark, possibly blue, maybe black, the camera too weak to tell. A man stepped out briefly, face turned away, then back in. The plate was unreadable, a blur of light. The detectives enhanced it anyway, frame by frame, pixel by pixel, like desperation could sharpen reality. Nothing. Just blur. Just the sense of being watched through bad glass. They were close enough to feel it and far enough to be helpless. That's the special cruelty of unsolved cases in the modern era. The world is filled with cameras and data, and still a person can vanish. A predator can move like a shadow between streetlights, and the truth can stay just out of reach, not because it's impossible, but because it's patient. The cold case team met with Marisol's mother again. They told her about the DNA association. They told her about the method, the similarities, the possibility of a series. They watched her face tighten, as if she'd been hit, and refused to fall. So he did it again, she whispered, and it wasn't a question, it was a sentence made of grief. Or someone like him. She held a daisy in her hand, petals bruised from her grip, and she said, "Then he's still out there." The detective wanted to lie to her. He wanted to tell her they were close, that the net was tightening, that justice was marching forward with inevitability. But he couldn't. All he could do was tell the truth in the only way that didn't feel like surrender: "We're still working it. Still working it. Still. After all these years. Still." The word tasted like iron. And as they left her house, the evening fog began to roll in again, soft and silent, swallowing the streetlights one by one, turning the neighborhood into a tunnel of muted halos, and the detective felt the old image rise in his mind: Marisol's car on the shoulder, hazard lights ticking, door open, jacket folded like a deliberate gesture. And he realized something that made his stomach knot. Whoever did this had always relied on time, on the way attention fades, on the way witnesses forget, on the way evidence decays, on the way hope exhausts itself. Time was his accomplice. The cold case team's only weapon was time too, but used the other way. Time spent digging, time spent retesting, time spent chasing tiny signatures left behind by a man who believed he could erase everything. The question wasn't whether the case could be solved. The question was whether the predator would make one mistake before the people chasing him ran out of years, and as the fog thickened and the highway beyond the hills began its nightly hum, it felt like the whole coast was holding its breath again, waiting for a headline that might never come, listening for a voice that might still be calm, still polite, still asking for help in the dark. By 2012 the Vega file had become a living thing in the unit, a creature that didn't die when you shut the drawer, only grew quieter, more watchful, the kind of case that waits for you to relax, so it can crawl back onto your desk at 2 a.m. and stare. The cold case team stopped thinking in years and started thinking in textures: old paper, brittle tape, fading ink, evidence bags yellowing at the seams, because time wasn't just a number on a calendar anymore. It was an enemy with a slow hand, sanding down edges, blurring faces, turning hard facts into soft maybes. They learned to fight it the only way you can, by revisiting the beginning like it was new, by treating the first night as if it happened yesterday, by forcing the scene to speak again even if all it had left was a whisper. They pulled the original 911 call log, the anonymous tip from the payphone. The recording itself was gone, tapes overwritten, storage limits, budget cuts, the mundane violence of administrative decay, but the dispatch transcript remained, typed and stamped. The caller had used a phrase that hadn't stood out in 1997, because everyone was focused on the open door and the folded jacket. In the transcript, the caller didn't say a car. The caller said a red jacket first. There's a red jacket on the seat. There's a car on the 101. Lights on. Door open. That order mattered now. It meant the caller had looked inside, had noticed details, had been close enough to see cloth in the darkness. It meant the caller wasn't a distant driver passing at 60 miles per hour. The caller had been there. Standing beside Marisol's vehicle. Close enough to smell it. Close enough to touch it. And then the caller vanished into the night like a match snuffed between fingers. So the team did what detectives do when there's nothing left but the shape of a question. They hunted the infrastructure around the question. They pulled records on payphone maintenance routes. They tracked down the old telecom contractor who serviced that booth in the late 90s. He was retired now, living inland, hands stiff from age. He laughed when they showed him the address. That phone, he said. That phone was a magnet for trouble. Drunks, deals, people calling from nowhere. He couldn't remember faces. But he did remember something odd. 2 days after Marisol vanished, he'd been sent to check that booth because it was acting up. He said he found the handset smeared with something sticky, like soda spilled, and the coin return jammed with a wad of paper. He'd cleaned it. He'd thrown the paper away without looking. He told them this now with a defeated shrug, like a man realizing he'd tossed a lottery ticket into a trash can years ago. The detectives didn't blame him out loud. Inside, they felt the old rage flare. Evidence doesn't only get destroyed by killers, it gets destroyed by time and routine and people who don't know they're holding a thread. They pivoted to the liquor store itself. Different owner now. Renovated. New cameras. Bright lights. But in a storage room behind shelves of snack boxes, the new owner had kept an old cardboard box of junk left by the previous manager, faded receipts, broken signage, a couple of dusty VHS tapes. The detectives' hearts kicked when they saw the tapes, because sometimes the past survives in the laziest places, in the corners nobody wants to clean. The tapes were unlabeled. They took them anyway. They sent them to a specialist, who could coax images out of decaying magnetic ribbon. Days later, they watched the monitor in the lab as grainy black and white footage flickered to life. Time travel, ugly and miraculous. It wasn't the night Marisol vanished. The tape date stamp was smudged, but the calendar overlay suggested it was within that same month. The camera angle covered the payphone and part of the parking lot. People came and went in jerky, ghostly motion. A man used the phone, then left. A car pulled in, then out. It was mundane. Until it wasn't. At one point, near midnight, an SUV rolled into frame and stopped near the payphone. The headlights cut, leaving the vehicle a dark block. A figure stepped out. The footage was too poor to show the face, but you could see posture, unhurried, controlled. The figure approached the phone, lifted the receiver, held it for a moment, then, this was the part that froze the room, turned and looked directly at the camera as if the person could sense it watching, as if the person understood surveillance and didn't care. Then the figure hung up and walked away, disappearing into shadow. It wasn't proof of anything. It wasn't even definitely connected. But the timing, the vehicle type, the calmness, it pressed on the case like a thumb on a bruise. The team isolated frames, enhanced contrast, chased reflections. They found nothing clean enough for an ID. Still, they had something they'd never had before, the outline of a vehicle in motion near the payphone. They measured its proportions against known objects in the frame. They estimated wheelbase. They guessed make and model. It narrowed the field, not to one, but to a family of SUVs common in the 90s. A family that included metallic blues. Then another piece, smaller but sharper, fell out of the file like a hidden shard. In 1997, the responding officer had written a note about a faint smell of cigarette smoke inside Marisol's vehicle, despite Marisol being a non-smoker. The note had been dismissed at the time. Highways smell like exhaust, cars get smoky from passengers, from previous owners. But Marisol had owned her car since new. She kept it clean. Her friends said she hated smoke. The cigarette smell mattered now, especially paired with the survivor's statement from the later attempted abduction. Soap and cigarettes. A scent signature. Not enough to convict, enough to haunt. They brought in a behavioral analyst, not the Hollywood kind with dramatic monologues, but the quiet, clinical kind who speaks in probabilities and patterns. The analyst studied the folded jacket, the staged abandonment, the repeated approach with the help. He said the offender likely enjoyed control and ritual, likely had an organized personality, likely planned and rehearsed, likely chose locations with escape routes and poor surveillance, likely used a vehicle that blended into common traffic. He said something else too, something that landed like a lead weight. The offender may have inserted himself into the investigation early, either by calling in the vehicle, by acting as a helpful witness, by watching the scene. People like this, the analyst said, want to be near the fire they set. They want to see the panic ripple. They want to know they can stand among the searchers unnoticed. So the detectives went back to the list of early witnesses, early tipsters, early names that had been written down and then forgotten in the rush of the first weeks. They pulled reports, scribbled notes, the kind of paperwork that looks meaningless until you read it with new eyes. There was the truck driver who saw a woman waving. There were the volunteers who searched the embankment. There were the men who stopped at the shoulder claiming they saw nothing. There was a good Samaritan who had called in to say he'd checked the car, and didn't see anyone, then left. His name, Curtis H. Malloy. Age in 1997, 38. Occupation, independent roadside assistance contractor, one of those men who drive with toolboxes and jumper cables, who thrive on strangers' breakdowns. He'd lived 2 towns inland. He'd owned, according to an old DMV pull, an SUV in 1997, color listed as blue-green. He'd also been briefly investigated and cleared at the time, because he had a solid alibi and seemed cooperative. Cooperative. That word can be a gift or a disguise. They found Curtis Malloy. He was older now, heavier, hair gray at the temples, still driving service vehicles, still making his living on people stranded by the roadside. He sat across from them in an interview room and smiled like a man meeting clients, not police. He remembered the night vividly, he said. He remembered seeing the hazard lights, pulling over, walking up, calling out. He remembered the folded jacket. He remembered thinking it was strange. He remembered leaving because it felt off, and he didn't want trouble. He'd called it in from the payphone, he claimed, because cell service was bad and his own phone battery was low. He described the liquor store without being prompted. He described the payphone's chipped paint. He described the sound of the highway through fog. The detectives listened and felt the room tighten. People forget details after 15 years. People forget the color of chipped paint. People don't carry that much clarity unless the memory is rehearsed. They asked him if he smoked. He said yes. They asked what brand. He said Marlboro Lights. They asked if he'd ever met Marisol Vega. He said no. They asked if he'd ever been to her clinic. He said no. They asked if he'd ever dated someone named Marisol. He laughed. They asked if he'd ever used nylon cord for his work. He said everyone uses cord. He shrugged like Devin had shrugged years earlier, like the world was the problem for asking. They asked for his DNA. He refused, again with that calm rights talk that isn't illegal, just frustrating. They asked to look at his vehicles. He refused. They asked where he'd been later that night after calling 911. He said he went home, slept, got up early for a job. They asked who could confirm. His wife, now ex-wife. His neighbor, now moved. His co-worker, no longer in touch. Alibis rot over time. He knew that. Or maybe time had simply done the work for him. The cold case team didn't have enough for a warrant. So they did what they could, they watched. They pulled his trash. They followed him on calls. They noted the routes he drove, the places he lingered, the way his head turned toward women walking alone at gas stations. They tried to trap him in the modern world, where cameras exist and phones ping towers, where leaving no trace is harder. But a man who has survived decades in the margins learns to move in blind spots. He kept his hands clean. He used cash. He avoided leaving cups or napkins behind. He smiled when he noticed unmarked cars in his mirror, not frightened, almost amused, like he recognized the dance. Then the smallest crack appeared, and it came from grief, not luck. Marisol's mother died in 2014. Heart failure. Years of stress and sleeplessness, and carrying a question in her chest. At the funeral, the detective stood in the back and watched the family fold around the casket like paper. He watched Marisol's younger brother, now a man, stare at the flowers as if they were mocking him. Daisies everywhere, because everyone had learned that detail, everyone had learned to treat daisies like a symbol, like a signature of longing. After the service, her brother approached the detective with a showbox. He said it had been in his mother's closet for years. He said she'd never shown it to police, because she didn't want to lose it in the system. Inside the box was Marisol's old answering machine tape. Back then, people left messages you could hear on a plastic cassette, voices trapped in a small loop of magnetic film. The detective held it like a fragile organ. They took it to the lab. They digitized it. They listened. Most of it was ordinary, friends asking about dinner, co-workers swapping shifts, her mother reminding her to call. Then, near the end, there was a message that wasn't ordinary. A man's voice. Calm. Low. Controlled. He didn't say his name. He didn't threaten. He didn't shout. He said, "Marisol, it's me. We need to talk. Don't ignore me. I'm trying to help you." Then, after a pause that felt like a smile you couldn't see, he added, "If you don't answer, I'll come by." The room went cold. I'm trying to help you. Help. That word again. The same bait, the same velvet glove over something sharp. They ran voice analysis, not as magic, but as comparison, pitch, cadence, rhythm. They pulled recordings from past interviews with Devin. From the Oregon Predators court tapes. From Curtis Malloy's recent interview. They compared. The analysts cautioned that voice matching isn't definitive, that microphones and time change sound. But the detective didn't need certainty to feel it in his spine. Curtis Malloy's cadence, those measured pauses, that calm insistence, sat too close to the tape's voice, like two prints from the same hand. Now they had something that could push. Not enough for an arrest. But enough to dig harder. They went back to Marisol's phone bills and realized something they'd missed in the 90s, because the world wasn't yet trained to think in metadata. Marisol had received a cluster of short calls, hang-ups, from a number that had never been identified. In 1997 it had been logged as blocked. In 2014, with new subpoena capabilities and archived telecom records, they could sometimes trace even old blocked calls to switching stations. It was a long shot, a prayer, a bureaucratic grind that took months. And then, one afternoon, a report landed on the detective's desk with a partial origin, a payphone, used repeatedly, located, like a cruel joke, near the same liquor store. The circle tightened. The anonymous caller. The hang-ups. The liquor store payphone as an anchor point, a place the offender returned to like a shrine. The detectives didn't celebrate. They didn't high-five. They stared at the report and felt dread, because every connection also meant something else. The offender had been close, locally rooted, not a drifter passing through once. It meant the predator might have been watching Marisol for weeks, learning her routines, rehearsing his script. It meant the case wasn't a random storm, it was a slow stalking. They drove out to the highway that night, not on duty, not with lights, just in silence, because sometimes you need to see the place where a life broke. Fog drifted low, smearing the world into gray. The shoulder looked harmless until you remembered the hazard lights ticking in that same air. The detective parked, stepped out, and stood where Marisol's door had been open, feeling the wind push at his coat. He imagined a calm voice in the darkness saying, "I'm trying to help you," and he imagined Marisol's hand reaching for the folded jacket, maybe confused, maybe alarmed, maybe already trapped. And in that moment he understood the real cruelty of the case. It had never been just about the disappearance. It was about trust weaponized, about kindness turned into a hook, about the way a simple offer of help can become the last sound a person hears before the world closes. Somewhere out there, a man who knew how to sound safe had kept breathing for decades, living among neighbors, buying groceries, waving at kids, and the case had followed him like a shadow he couldn't fully outrun. A shadow that now, after a dead mother's showbox, after an answering machine tape, after a stubborn circle of payphone calls, had started to sharpen its edges again, not into a solution, not yet, but into a shape clear enough to terrify, because when a cold case warms, it doesn't just promise answers, it also promises the possibility that the person who did it has been walking free the whole time, calm voice intact, waiting for the next moment someone believes help is harmless. The tape rewired the case the way a single drop of blood rewires a room, because it wasn't just a voice, it was intent pressed into plastic, the calm insistence of a man who knew how to dress a threat in the language of concern, and once you hear that tone you start hearing it everywhere, in old reports, in polite refusals, in the way a witness says, "I was just trying to help," and the cold case team began to move differently, like they were finally walking on solid ground, but the ground could still crack. They didn't tell the public about the answering machine message, not yet, because the public turns details into weapons, and weapons cut the wrong people, and because if Curtis Malloy was the anonymous caller, if he was the one orbiting that liquor store payphone like a moth around a bulb, then the worst thing they could do was warn him. So they kept their mouths shut and tightened their hands around the pieces they had, the transcript that mentioned the jacket first, the CCTV ghost by the payphone, the blocked calls that now pointed back to that same spot, the ritual of folding fabric, the cheap pale blue cord, the partial male DNA profile whispering from the windbreaker's cuff, and Malloy sitting in the middle of it all like a man who had learned the power of playing ordinary. They needed his DNA. Not as a hunch, not as a feeling. They needed it as a key. And they needed it legally, cleanly, because even a monster can walk if the evidence is dirty. But warrants don't grow on desire. They grow on probable cause, and probable cause is picky. So they built it brick by brick. They pulled every service call Malloy had ever logged, every tow and jump start and roadside assist he'd done in the coastal corridor between 1995 and 2000. He'd kept paper records, the kind you tuck into a glove box, handwritten, sloppy. Some were missing. Some were illegible. Some listed only first names and mile markers. But patterns emerged like stains. He worked nights. He worked alone. He positioned himself where people were stranded and vulnerable. He had access to the same highways, the same exits, the same blind pullouts where an SUV could disappear. And then they found something that made the detective's stomach twist. In the months before Marisol vanished, Malloy had done 2 assists, within 5 miles of her clinic. Same address cluster. Same hours. Different customers. And in one of those old slips, scribbled in the margin like a private note, was a phrase, "Pretty girl." Nervous. Pretty girl. Nervous. That wasn't professional. That was predatory. They took it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor frowned and said it was suggestive, but not enough. "We need more," she said, and her voice wasn't cold, it was terrified of losing, because losing in court isn't just losing a case, it's giving a predator a trophy called acquittal. The detectives went back out and hunted more like it was oxygen. They went after Malloy's past the way you go after rot in a wall, ripping away layers that look solid until you press. They found an old restraining order filed by a girlfriend in 1993, dismissed when she didn't show for the hearing. They found a workplace complaint from 1996, a woman at a trucking company saying Malloy wouldn't stop calling, wouldn't stop offering help, wouldn't stop showing up near her car. No charges. No arrest. Just paper, just whispers, the kinds of warnings that fall through the cracks, because women learn to survive by minimizing, and institutions learn to survive by ignoring. They found a traffic stop from 1998, where an officer noted a length of pale blue nylon cord in the back of Malloy's SUV, and wrote it off as work gear. Work gear. Like the rope found near the riverbed. Like the rope in Devin's toolbox. Like the rope that kept appearing as if the state itself were laced together with cheap blue thread. Still, paper wasn't DNA. Paper wasn't enough to put a swab in his mouth. So they changed tactics. They stopped trying to pull his DNA from trash, and started trying to pull him into a moment he couldn't control. They watched his routine until it felt like their own. Tuesday mornings he bought coffee at the same diner off the highway, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who calls everyone hun. He sat at the counter, drank slowly, read the paper like the headlines didn't apply to him. He smoked outside afterward, leaning against his truck, flicking ash into a planter. The detectives watched from across the lot with the patience of hunters and the bitterness of people who have waited decades to catch a man breathing. One morning, Malloy finished his cigarette, crushed it under his boot, and walked away without looking back. The detective's pulse jumped. A cigarette, but is a DNA sample you can hold between tweezers. They waited until he was inside paying his bill, then crossed the lot and plucked the butt from the dirt like it was a jewel. They bagged it. Sealed it. Logged it. They drove it straight to the lab with hands that didn't quite stop shaking until the door clicked shut behind it. Days later, the lab called with a result that felt like a door opening and a gun cocking at the same time. The DNA profile from the cigarette, but matched the unknown male partial profile from Marisol's windbreaker. Not perfectly, because the windbreaker sample was degraded, partial, mixed with background noise, but enough markers aligned to call it a likely match, strong enough to make the analyst's voice tighten when she said it. The detective stared at the report and felt heat behind his eyes. After all these years, the case had finally touched skin. They went back to the prosecutor with something solid in a folder. The prosecutor read it, jaw clenched, and nodded once. "Now we move," she said, and the words sounded like relief and dread braided together. They brought Malloy in on a pretext, an unrelated inquiry, a routine follow-up, because they didn't want him bolting. He walked into the station with that same calm smile, that same easy posture of a man who believes the room belongs to him. They sat him down, offered water, asked casual questions, watched his hands. Then they slid the paper across the table and said, "We have DNA." His smile held for a fraction too long, like a mask sticking to sweat, and then it cracked at the corners. "DNA doesn't mean anything," he said quickly. Too quickly. He tried to laugh. It came out thin. They read him his rights. They swabbed his cheek under warrant. They booked him. Fingerprinted him. Photographed him. The camera flash hit his face and it looked ordinary, wrinkles, pores, gray stubble, and that ordinariness was the most frightening thing in the room, because it meant evil didn't have to look like anything. Outside, word leaked as it always does, and the town that had carried Marisol's name like a bruise for 17 years suddenly heard a new headline crack through the air. Arrest in 1997 disappearance. People stopped in grocery aisles to read their phones. People sat up in bed and whispered, "They got him." Marisol's brother got the call at work and dropped his coffee on the floor. He drove to the station with his hands locked at 10, and 2 like he was afraid of what he might do if he let go. In the interrogation room, Malloy stayed calm. Calm like the voice on the tape. Calm like a man offering help on the shoulder of a highway. He denied knowing Marisol. Denied calling her. Denied touching her jacket. "I'm roadside assistance," he said. "I touch a lot of things." He leaned forward and told them they were wasting time, that their DNA was contaminated, that everyone in the world had touched that windbreaker, because the cops had handled it, the techs had handled it, volunteers had handled it. He spoke in confident paragraphs, like he'd rehearsed them, like he'd sat alone at night preparing for this moment, because predators don't just plan the crime, they plan the defense. The detectives played the answering machine message. The room changed. The tape hissed, then the calm voice filled the air. "Marisol, it's me, I'm trying to help you." Malloy's eyes didn't widen. He didn't flinch dramatically. He just went very still, and his jaw flexed once, a tiny betrayal. "That's not me," he said. But his voice had the same measured cadence, the same controlled softness. The detective watched him and knew denial was the only armor he had left. They pressed him on the payphone. On the jacket first phrasing in the transcript. On the service slips with pretty girl. Nervous. On the blue cord. On the cigarette butt. He shrugged. He smiled. He said, "Coincidences." He said, "You people love a story." He said, "You need to make me your monster." And the detective felt a cold wave of rage, because yes, they needed a monster, but only because someone had made one necessary. Then the case hit the wall it had always been moving toward, court. The defense attorney came in like a storm wearing a suit, and storms don't need to be truthful to be destructive. She filed motions. She challenged chain of custody. She attacked the partial nature of the original DNA sample. She argued the windbreaker had been improperly stored in the 90s, that DNA degradation could create false associations, that the cigarette butt collection was a violation, that the surveillance constituted harassment, that the warrant was built on speculation. She demanded the evidence logs from 1997, the kind of logs that were written by tired hands at 3 a.m., when no one imagined the future would interrogate their pen strokes. She found gaps. Not big ones, not intentional, but gaps are cracks, and cracks are where defense lives. The prosecutor fought back. She brought in analysts. She brought in experts to explain how the DNA markers aligned. She brought in the behavioral pattern of folded clothing. She brought in the phone call transcript. She brought in the old service slips. She built a case like a scaffold, careful, precise, designed to hold weight. And for a moment it looked like the coast might finally exhale. Then a judge, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and stale coffee, ruled that the DNA evidence was admissible but limited, that the statistical strength couldn't be overstated, that the windbreaker sample's partial profile reduced certainty, that the cigarette butt match could suggest contact, but not necessarily criminal contact. Suggest. Not prove. The word hit like a slap. Suggest is what you say when you can't say sure. The defense pounced on suggest. She painted Malloy as a working man who stopped to help, a good Samaritan who found a strange car and did the responsible thing by calling it in. She told the jury he'd likely touched the jacket when he looked into the car. She told them Marisol's DNA wasn't on him, Marisol's phone wasn't in his house, Marisol wasn't in his garage. She told them the state had no body, no cause of death, no eyewitness to an abduction, no confession. She told them fear had filled the gaps and fear isn't evidence. And in the middle of that legal war, the case suffered a second, quieter wound. A key witness broke. The lab analyst, who had first said the DNA match was strong enough to move on, was cross-examined for hours, hammered on technicalities, forced to admit the sample was partial, that contamination is always possible, that certainty is a word scientists avoid. She didn't lie. She just did what science does. It left room for doubt. And doubt is the only thing a defense needs. Marisol's brother sat through it all with fists clenched, nails digging into skin. He wanted the world to be simple, for once, wanted a villain and a verdict and the clean slam of a cell door. Instead he watched language turn into smoke. Probable. Likely. Suggestive. Possible. The same words that had haunted the case since 1997, now dressed up in legal robes, now given the power to decide whether a man walked free. The jury deliberated. Hours. Days. The town held its breath like it had in every foggy night for nearly 2 decades. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. People refreshed news pages at their desks. The ocean kept pounding the shore like it didn't care. And then the verdict came back. Not guilty on the charge of kidnapping. Not guilty on everything they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The courtroom made a sound like a collective gut punch, air leaving lungs all at once. Malloy stood, adjusted his tie, and smiled, and that smile was worse than any scream, because it said he understood the system and he had just used it as a shield. Outside, cameras caught Marisol's brother shouting at reporters, voice cracking, saying the case wasn't over, saying justice wasn't done, saying the truth doesn't disappear, just because a jury can't hold it. The prosecutor avoided microphones, eyes red, and in a quiet hallway she said to the detective, he did it, not as a legal statement, but as a human one, the kind you say when you've stared at too many patterns to believe coincidence. The detective nodded, because he believed it too, and belief didn't matter in court. Malloy walked out of the courthouse into sunlight, like a man leaving a dentist appointment. He got into his truck. He drove away. No handcuffs. No escort. Just road and time and a new lesson for a predator, even when the past catches up, it can still fail to bite. The cold case team returned to the office with the Vega file heavier than ever, not because new pages had been added, but because hope had been crushed inside it and ground into dust. But they didn't close it. They couldn't. Because the DNA hadn't vanished. The voice on the tape hadn't changed. The payphone circle hadn't drawn itself. The folded jacket was still folded in evidence, waiting like an accusation. And now, with Malloy legally untouchable for the charges they'd brought, the team faced a darker problem. If he was their man and he knew he'd survived, what would he do next? Men like this don't always stop. Sometimes they simply adapt. Sometimes they become more careful. Sometimes they realize the world is watching and they learn to enjoy that too. And on a fog-heavy night not long after the verdict, a patrol unit responded to a call on the 101, hazard lights on the shoulder, a car door open, and when the officer arrived, there was no missing woman, no abandoned jacket, just an empty vehicle and a folded sweatshirt placed on the hood like a calling card, clean and neat, the fabric squared as if someone had pressed it with an iron, and the officer's radio crackled as he reported it in, his voice tight, because everyone in that county knew what folded clothing meant now. Everyone knew the taste of that ritual, and somewhere out there, beyond the reach of a verdict, beyond the reach of certainty, the calm voice that said, "I'm trying to help you," was still breathing, still hiding in ordinary daylight, still letting time do what time had always done: blur the edges, exhaust the witnesses, and keep the truth just slippery enough to survive.